Hi. I want to start by saying I have no giveaways, no biscuits. I thought I got really lucky because there were 3 packets of customers' creams here. I was going to give them out to start things off, but actually Offer took that from me as well. Offer touched on something which is quite passionate to me in our company, and it's about accountability in design. Because I think, over the last 10 years, we've all been creating amazing experiences where businesses have realised that it's absolutely essential to put the customer at the heart. And given the background of most of the people here, we all know how important it is to research our audience and meet their needs and innovate based on that. The problem that we've seen is when we get involved in massive transformation programs, more often than not, someone has created a business case to raise lots of money for the organisation, and then firms like ours get hired. And we never look at that business case at all. And in fact, our clients forget the business case too. And what we found quite strange is that in the business case, it says we're going to achieve this NPS growth or revenue target. And because we're researching with customers, no one questions the work that we do will hit those numbers. And for us, that's pretty crazy. And a couple of years ago, we were just finishing a 3-year transformation program for one of the big telcos, and we had a plus 40 NPS target, which is quite significant. No one once again questioned the whole way through the program whether the choices we were making were going to deliver the number. And for us, when we talked about this in the agency, we felt there was an elephant in the room, clearly not a physical one, that us and perhaps the industry, when we spoke to our competitor agencies and agencies that are close and friends to us, that no one's addressing it. And so we tried to work out how could we be more accountable in the experience design that we do to make sure we deliver the outcomes. And it's different when you're a startup, because we all know fail fast, but when you're in a large corporation like Tesco's, it's very, very, very hard to fail fast because of the complexity of the systems and the size of the organisation. And we said, how can we make sure that the choices we're making will shift that NPS score? And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. Unlike Tesco's, probably nobody knows us, or a handful of people know us. We are not a SIM card on the floor. So I just thought it might be useful to explain what we do. This is a bit out of date now. We're a 13-year-old business, but right at the start we said we stand for digital change only. So we're never about run. We're about how can we make change through digital to drive a business outcome. We don't have 450,000 people, we have about 150, and we are an experience and strategy design-led shop where we see things through to technical delivery. Let me show you really what we do, and then I'll go on to explain really the focus of this topic. And annoyingly, this video has a picture of me at the start, which I kind of hate, but given I'm standing here. Oh, sugar. Right. Maybe, yeah.
Sorry for the disruption.
So hopefully you recognise a whole bunch of those brands, if not us. And for those brands, what we've been really doing over the last few years, once again, is driving that transformation agenda, experience-led. And so back to this, how do we kind of tame this wild animal? I appreciate that's probably not a wild cat, but it's quite aggressive to me. It really, when we looked at this comes from McKinsey, and given McKinsey do a lot of transformation programs, what they basically tell you is that 70% of large, complex transformation programs fail, and those that are successful in the mid to long term, only 26% realise the outcomes. And given they're the ones writing the business case in the first place, there's a pretty shocking numbers. And I think there's been a fundamental change in the way that transformation has evolved over the last 15 to 20 years. Originally it was very business consultant-led, very internal approach, really quite often about cost and reorgs. Now we know today it's 100% about, not 100%, a lot of focus around the user and making sure that we have much better journeys and streamlined processes, ultimately to meet their needs. And when we're focusing on the user, this stuff is, I won't talk about pain point reduction, we got warned off it earlier, but they are typical goals which we measure on CXO transformation programs. Okay, but coming back to why the money was raised in the first instant, it's often the stuff in the right. Okay, so there's a cost reduction to be done, there's a revenue target or an NPS shift. And when we think about the tools that we use, they don't really tie back to an NPS shift, right? When we think about a needs matrix, it doesn't actually say what the outcome is going to be for the business. So a team of us at Bio worked on this for about 16 months, and when we looked at the early stages of the process, we could see there's a real disconnect from the business case to when we're hired. And then actually what often happens is we do a lot of research, really understand the pain points in the customers, and then the program starts delivering, and at some point there is a moment where it could be a budget problem or a timing issue, and then we'll reprioritize. And that's often done in a room with some product owners, and we might Moscow or whatever tools you might use. But we're trying to hit a number, it might be a date or a financial target, and we've once again lost the focus of the business case even further because we're in a room doing that. Once again, it's another complexity. We see breakages in the journey, and our tools today don't really guide us how to shift NPS. So, as I said earlier, we felt this was kind of crazy, right? We're getting hired and we're just not, our firm is not accountable. And as I said, we spent quite a lot of time trying to work out how we deal with this issue. And I don't believe this is perfect, and it's definitely work in progress, but really it's food for thought on how we've tried to change ourselves, which may be useful for you. It started really with changing the way we understand customers, new ways we can measure the work and understanding what does make a difference, and then involving the process. So there's a number of stages I'm going to go through, and we've kept it quite light. It gets quite heavy actually when you understand the full detail behind it. But the first thing really, our first stage now on every engagement, if a client doesn't have it, we create NPS driver models for them. I'm going to focus on NPS for a moment, but it's the same with revenue. But the key thing is to understand drivers across their organisation, to really understand what is important to their customers, so that we can focus on the right things that we know are going to shift NPS only. Okay, so using quant research, we go much deeper than normal NPS questions to say these are the things that are driving the overall score. Okay, that's the first bit of work that we now do on every engagement. The second stage is that we've changed the way we see customers. I guess when I first started in this industry, it was very much segment-based, and of course, for many years we've been using personas, and then we put the persona in a scenario. And when we first started working with British Airways, we realised that wasn't actually effective for us because we were thinking about business travellers. Business travellers are made of very different types of people, and mums of two was the same scenario. And what we started to get to was about characteristics, and how when we think of Yin Yang or Myers-Briggs that we all know, how that was more indicative to a person's personality type than a persona in a scenario. So we've moved quite heavily away from personas, and now we focus on psychological characteristics, because we believe when they're in the scenario, it's a much better prediction of human behaviour, which we now design our experiences around. And I won't dwell on this too much, and partly because of the subconscious thing has such a big impact in the way that we really behave over and above our conscious mind. And I'm going to show you an example on how it impacted the work in British Airways. So now we've got a different way of understanding customers, and we kind of have a guide, because of the driver model, on the things that we should focus on only. Bio was really, we used to love transformation maps. So we'd put a 3-year program down, we'd have a vision in the corner, we'd say this is the customer journey every year, this is the business journey, and we would ideate 100 things on that journey. And as I said before, we weren't really sure what was going to deliver the business outcomes on the journey. Now what we do is say, right, now we understand the things that drive NPS the most. All we're going to do is ideate around those 5 or 10 things only, and then track those things and see whether we're right. So, and the way that we do that is in the driver model, we know that driver might impact NPS, let's say 5. So when we ideate in that one small area, we know it's going to have an impact, and we make a judgment call to say, okay, let's call it a 3 impact. And then we use, of course, everything else that we normally use when we're designing experiences to make sure it pulls on both the functional and emotional. Like bios, I guess, originated from an innovation background, and we believe that although on paper the innovation may not deliver the number, we believe sometimes it's the magic dust over the top that creates a really happy customer. So even if our statistics are saying keep it quite functional, we make sure there's some kind of special sauce in there to create a halo effect around it. And lastly, we're quite behavioural science led, so we make sure that when we design journeys, we're pushing people along with the right nudges and so on. So to give you kind of a live-ish example, so when we were helping British Airways, we followed this kind of research process, and they had personas. We then created these kind of characteristic groupings, and it was really the first time we ran this process, and it was really interesting because, like I said, we didn't create loads of stuff. We created a number of things, some NPS focused and some revenue focused. I can't show you the full character groupings, but we've kind of slightly twisted this so we can make it public. But there was a type of person that was quite reactive, regardless of whether they be a business traveller or a mum of 2. And we knew, because we spent time with them as a group, and that they would never do things in advance. And we came to learn that a last-minute upgrade for this group, they would never do an upgrade in advance. They would never do it at the counter, but when they were airside, they would do it. And that only came out of the way that we understood them as a grouping versus a persona or a business traveller, and went on to be quite successful. It was live. There you are. And there was quite a lot of science behind that as well, in that if you're a business traveller, you're very unlikely to see this because you're more likely to do an upgrade. So we understood the behaviours of the passengers, and we only served it to those that hadn't upgraded in the past or hadn't gone business class in the past. The second group of people, which just went into beta, was kind of more like independent travellers, and they, excuse me, they didn't understand Avios. I think it's a fair point. And they weren't big miles collectors, and they used to get hugely frustrated with being charged for overweight bags. So we ran a trial on a number of routes, which we call baggage credit. Oops, sorry, I'm keen to press through this. Called baggage credit, and when we rolled it out, as I said, on certain routes only, and it had to hit all customers by the way we delivered it in mobile. If you flew with less than your 23 kilos, the difference was added to a wallet within your mobile. The next time you flew, if you were over, up to a certain allowance would allow you to use it. When we ran that to London, to a couple of US routes and to a couple of routes in Spain, unfortunately the CFO didn't like it. The CEO liked it, the CFO didn't like it. Even though we modelled the impact on cost, our view was it was a modern day loyalty scheme. Given this group don't understand Avios, we need to let it run for a long time to see if the behaviours would change. We never got to prove it, but I was very passionate about it. But it was definitely the change in the way that we worked that helped ideate this type of thinking. Oh, now it's showing, there we go. Okay. So now we kind of go into spreadsheet land, and I guess the key thing to mention here is this doesn't lengthen our process, and we've not built anything yet. But the way that we then organise what we focus on is saying, well, of all the ideas we've got on the table, what do we think the impact's going to be on NPS, and how complex do we believe it's going to be? And that's how we prioritise what we do. And the next thing is, of course, we've used some third-party tools to try and track the impact. Excuse me. We ran this for a client of ours in Canada, and we're trying to track much more than just an online experience data. This bank in Canada, the mortgage market's much further behind than ours, and you can't apply for mortgage online at all. Last year, in December, we were the first company, or they were the first company, to do that end-to-end. And they have a lot of branches, and typically we would only look at how many mortgages have been sold and what's the value of those mortgages. But what we did, we plugged in a much wider data set, so we knew how many mortgage advisors there were in branch, and over time we want to see whether that's going down and then being reallocated into other roles in the business. Then we know if our predictions have worked. See, my throat's drying up. So this is kind of how we're balancing, I guess, customer needs and business goals. Personally, I believe that's the next major focus for our industry. Clients aren't asking for us yet, but I think they will, because I think it's really hard to prove what we're doing today when you're on a bigger program. It's quite easy when we're talking about a CRO program, we're optimizing something, but on a bigger program to link it back, I think is often quite tricky, unless it's an efficiency drive only. And I think that's basically it. I don't think this will end. Like I said, we don't believe it's perfect right now. We're using it, and I think we're going to keep iterating it, and we're getting lots of feedback from clients, from people we show it to, and being quite open with the way that we're working here. I hope that was useful. Sorry there's no biscuits. I will carry some in the future. Okay, thanks so much.